Now, Alfred Woyome, the businessman embroiled in perhaps Ghana's most controversial judgment debt payout, has agreed to pay back the 51 million Ghana cedis he received from the state by the end of this year. Lawyer for Mr. Woyome gave the assurance before a panel of Supreme Court justices hearing the state's request for the court to clarify its earlier ruling on the matter. The court in 2014 had ordered Waterville Holdings Limited and Mr. Woyome to return to the state money they had obtained illegally arising out of claims they made against the state in 2009. The embattled businessman was paid 51 million cedis, while Waterville received in excess of 40 million euros. Now, joining us is Kwachi Alfred Woyome was in court and joins me in the studio with more on the proceedings. Good evening to you, Alfred. Now, tell me, how were the proceedings in court? Take us through the proceedings in court.
Well, today's matter, the court will hear this matter essentially because even though the Supreme Court had delivered a ruling on the matter asking Isofoton, Woyome and Waterville Holdings, the construction company, to pay the judgment debt, the Attorney General's Department or the state said that they were not clear in their minds as to how the process is to retrieve this money, because this matter was brought before the court by Mr. Martin Amida, former Attorney General, and the state was a defendant in this matter. So even though the ruling had gone in favor of the state, asking the state to retrieve the money, they were wondering that whether they were creditors or debtors in this case, because they were indeed the defendants, as I said. Yeah. So all they wanted the court to do was to provide a clear path in terms of the processes once again. But lawyers for Waterville and Mr. Alfred Woyome argued that there was no need for the state to come before the court for clarity to seek guidance, because they said, and the argument that the Supreme Court was clear in that judgment 2 years ago, 2013, that the state should go after the money. But
now, so the case was about the states or the Attorney General going to before the Supreme Court to seek clarity on its earlier ruling. So at what point did it happen that there was a promise or an assurance from Mr. Woyome to, that he was going to pay the money?
This was after the judges had dismissed this claim by the two legal representatives, that's Alfred Woyome's lawyer and lawyer for Waterville, who had argued that there was no point in the state coming to court for clarity. Mr. Woyome's lawyer, and this was indeed after the court had ruled that, well, they had every right, the state has every right to come before the court for guidance. Then Mr. Woyome's lawyer voluntarily came in and said that, well, my client is even in the process of paying this money. There have been separate meetings, 4 separate meetings between Mr. Woyome and the AG herself, Marietta Bria-Piopon, on how to pay this money. And he was emphatic that the money will be paid by the end of this year, 2015, that's by December, to be more clear on this. At this point, many were wondering the reaction from the judges, the panel, the 9-member panel, including Chief Justice herself, Georgina Wood, Justice Atukba was there as well. They were all surprised. So they asked that, is this a promise you are making to the court? You sure you can deliver on this promise? And he said, certainly, we are on the processes. And he further indicated that a more reason Mr. Woyome was not in court today, Israel, is because he's fast-tracking the process of ensuring that he is able to
make the money available.
By that set
deadline. Does it suggest that it's possible that the money could actually come before the end of the year?
That is possible, because that is the deadline he has said. It could happen before or specifically by that timeline. But I've been working out my sources at the Attorney General's Department, finding out, because when you hear this, the first thing that comes to mind is whether there's been any sort of agreement in terms of a structured payment plan between,
especially because they say there had been previous meetings.
And about 2 weeks ago, Manasseh Azure Awene, Joy News reporter, spoke to Marietta Bria-Piopon on this particular matter, and she indicated that there had been some proposals from Mr. Woyome's camp indicating that they wanted a certain payment plan, but that was not favorable to the state. So the state had rejected it. Now, my sources and officials of the AG's department are willing to comment on this matter, but they tell me that no specific arrangement has been agreed.
Okay.
Payment plan has been agreed between Woyome and the Attorney General. They don't even know about this end of year assurance to pay the money. And aside this meeting which I made reference to earlier on now between the AG and Mr. Woyome, they say that there's not been any subsequent meetings, but they are determined, and this ruling by the Supreme Court today gives them the green light to push forward insofar as retrieving the cash is concerned. Now there's no hindrance.
Are they indicating that they're going to attach some properties of his, or I mean moving in on his properties to, you know, retrieve those monies? Yes,
the Attorney General has indicated that already. He's Dominic Ayini, I'm talking about the Deputy Attorney General in this case, indicated on Newsfile that they've identified some properties of assets of Mr. Woyome already, about 4 of them, and they will ensure that all that will help them in retrieving whatever monies the state is due.
Thank you very much, Kwachi Afrenium, and he covered the courts for us today, and indeed we'll be watching out to finding out what's next the Attorney General is going to do, or the state is going to do in this case.